Hello there, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. Bosnia and Herzegovina should get candidate status to join the European Union. Well, that's the recommendation of the European Commission, which calls it a historic moment for the citizens of Bosnia. The move is a significant step forward for a country shaken by political infighting and ethnic tensions. Bosnia has been waiting for candidate status for nearly 2 decades. But now the EU expects its leaders to make the recommended reforms as soon as possible, as the report shows legislative gridlock and the lack of general progress. The recommendation still needs to be endorsed by all 27 EU countries in a vote due to take place in December.
We have proposed to grant candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina in the college decision. We have recognized Georgia's European perspective too. So wind of change is once again blowing through Europe, and we have to capture this momentum. We have to push for this momentum. The Western Balkans belong in our family, and we have to make this very, very clear.
We'll look into what this decision means for Bosnia's future in a moment. But first, Serbia, the biggest EU candidate country in the Western Balkans, has failed to align with EU policy. Well, that's from the latest EU enlargement report that says Belgrade must step up commitments, most notably by joining EU-imposed sanctions on Russia and push forward with reforms to join the bloc. It adds that Serbia's compliance with the EU's foreign policy has dropped from 64% in 2020 to 45% this year in reference to its refusal to join Western sanctions. And Belgrade is now being pushed to pick a side amid mounting pressure from Brussels and Moscow. The Serbian president says the report is realistic and should be taken seriously.
I have told the head of the EU delegation in Serbia that we will take seriously and responsibly their opinions, thoughts, and recommendations. But of course, the political aspect overshadowed this report, and that is the only part of the report. And I want for people in Serbia to know this, because many politicians and media would like to talk about Serbia going backwards. And according to the EU, this has been reported only in one area, not in any other area. The only regression that has been noted for Serbia is in our relations towards the EU sanctions imposed on Russia.
Let's cross to Brussels, where Toby Vogel joins us now. He's a political analyst specializing in EU and the Balkans and the co-founder of Democratization Policy Council. Toby, great to have you with us on Across the Balkans. Now, what's the reason behind the EU's decision to grant Bosnia candidate status, despite the report that shows not a lot of progress for the country?
The report was actually quite brutal. I mean, it's one of the toughest reports that I've ever read, and I've been following this for 15 or so years. The main reason why the Commission is recommending to the member states to grant Bosnia-Herzegovina candidate status is geopolitical. It is the Russian attack against Ukraine. It is the feeling that the Western Balkans are vulnerable to Russian influence, malign influence, and that there hasn't been enough forward movement in the accession process in recent years.
Right. People in Bosnia have told us many times that they've lost trust in the EU. But let's hear their reaction to the announcement that Bosnia will get the candidate status finally.
I think it's better for people of Bosnia to stay in Bosnia. European Union is basically using all of the frustration of young people in Bosnia to leave and move to European Union. When Bosnia joins EU, young people will flock EU and leave Bosnia. So, instead of keeping young people here to make changes inside the country, they will all leave, so the situation in Bosnia will not change substantially.
I think this means a lot, because people will stay here. There will be work, people will be able to go to school, there will be everything. The worst thing is that young people leave. I stayed, and I'm 93 years old.
I stayed and I'm 93 years old, and he's hoping that not more young people will leave. We know the country still has a long way to go, but can some positive steps towards the candidacy prevent young people from leaving and give some hope to the Bosnians?
I think the reasons why young people in particular, are leaving are quite complex. But at heart, it's the search for what a lot of my friends call a quote unquote normal life. That doesn't just mean economic opportunity. It also means a feeling that your vote counts. It means a feeling that you're part of a community, that your politicians are accountable, and so on and so forth. This will not change with candidate status. Candidate status, if indeed it is granted in December, will be an important signal. But after that, there will have to be massive reform, and I'm not sure that the governments that will emerge from the recent elections will be willing to undertake that reform.
And what are the similarities between Ukraine and Moldova's recommendations back in July to that of Bosnia?
Well, they're a copy-paste, really. I mean, the Bosnia recommendation by the European Commission is a copy-paste of the one for Ukraine and Moldova, basically saying, we expect you to undertake the following, or to address the following 8 priorities, but we recommend to the member states to grant you candidacy even on the pure understanding that you are committed to doing that. So they're not conditions. Bosnia does not need to do this in order to get candidate status.
Right. Let's listen to the EU Commissioner for Enlargement explaining what comes next.
Following general elections on the 2nd of October, we expect the legislators and governments at state, entity and cantonal levels to be swiftly set up in order to focus on EU reforms. It will be for the European Council to take the final decision, possibly in December. The Commission stands ready to step up its support and to be a reliable partner along this road.
Now the decisions need to be confirmed in December. How likely is that this will happen, given, as you were mentioning, a short time frame for Bosnian politicians to change anything, especially now after the elections, when we've seen not much has changed, actually?
There's a level of frustration on the part of EU member states with the pace of reform in Bosnia. And I think that is something that sets it apart from Ukraine and Moldova, clearly. So whether new governments will be in place by December, which I very much doubt, and whether those new governments will then actually be serious about reform, a lot of member states are doubting this. And they are saying, we, the EU, should not give a candidate status unless there's some serious steps towards addressing those issues first.
Meanwhile, Serbia was criticized for its foreign policy and neutral stance since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. And let me read the European Parliament Foreign Affairs Committee's press release here. It says any EU funds for Serbia should be reconsidered in order to ensure that all EU expenditures are fully in line with the EU's own strategic goals and interests. So a press release is quoting recommendations adopted by the committee. It said the EU should prioritize the alignment of accession countries with the EU's common foreign and security policy. What kind of message did the EU send to Serbia this time?
It's a fairly tough message. I think there was some understanding earlier this year that Serbia could not just join the EU sanctions against Russia because it has obviously its own national interests, it has its balancing act to take, and so on and so forth. But that patience is really wearing thin. And on top of that, there is another issue that is of increasing concern to a lot of the member states, but also the EU institutions, which is migration. The migrant numbers on the so-called Balkan route are up, and there's increasing anxiety as well as impatience with Serbia on this issue.
And what does this decision mean for the future of Serbia's EU accession? And if the time comes and Serbia does sanction Russia, what kind of consequences would that have for Serbia? And what kind of reaction would we see in a country where Vladimir Putin still has a very, very high approval rating?
Well, that is a very good question. And of course, it's a question that people in this city in Brussels are asking themselves as well. They don't want to push President Vučić too hard, but they also need to see something actually taking place. I think as I said, the patience is wearing thin. The Serbian excuses why they cannot join the sanctions are increasingly seen as exactly that, as excuses. And there's a feeling also that EU member states themselves, of course, are seeing the negative effect of the sanctions. They're seeing, spiking energy prices and so on and so forth, disruption in trade and supply chains and what have you. There is a feeling, we in Europe, countries that want to join the European Union really need to be serious about this.
Now, given that this report by the EU Commission has left leaders in the region confused, I must say, about what kind of recommendations they want, is this, the Brussels wants, is this telling us that the EU still doesn't have a concrete plan on how to deal with the Western Balkans in the wake of a growing Russian influence?
Oh, I think that's very true. I do not think that the European Union has a serious political strategy for political engagement outside of the enlargement framework. And the enlargement framework has not the enlargement process has not really delivered for pretty much for any of these countries in recent years. There is a growing feeling, of course, in the Balkans that the EU doesn't want them. There's a growing feeling that the process has become so bureaucratic, so slow, but also so political, allowing member states to raise their bilateral issues in the framework of accession talks, that I think that the confidence that this really will lead to meaningful progress is evaporating.
And just briefly, Toby, in the wake of the war in Ukraine, many expected a massive shift when it comes to the EU's policy towards the Western Balkans, as this was seen was one of the hotspots as well, and a place with so much political infighting. But their approach didn't change that much. What can we expect in the upcoming months?
I would not actually expect that much. I would expect, I think there is a chance that Bosnia will get candidate status in December. The December European Council is supposed to discuss enlargement. I do not expect major movement on other files, because let's not forget, in the case of Serbia, for example, the accession negotiations were going very, very slow because of a lack of progress on the rule of law and of similar issues on the part of Serbia. So that is independent of Russia, it's independent of Ukraine, it's independent of the current geopolitical situation. So even if you subtract that, the progress has been extremely slow. And I don't think that we're going to see a major step change in the coming months.
Toby Vogel, great to have you with us. Thank you. Let's now look at the EU report's findings for other Balkan countries. The European Commission says Kosovo has made some progress on many issues, including fighting corruption, terrorism, and improving human rights. According to the report, the country is at an early stage of developing a functioning economy that aligns with EU criteria. The Commission also advises Kosovo to reach a comprehensive and legally binding normalization agreement with Serbia so that both countries can advance on their European paths. Kosovo's Prime Minister Albin Kurti has described the report on his country as the best in the region. For Montenegro, the report says the country has failed to enact electoral, legal, and institutional reforms. According to the EU, political instability, tensions, polarization, and the absence of constructive engagement between political parties are impeding Montenegro's progress. The report also adds that while the country has made some headway in the fight against corruption and organized crime, there are still major areas that need improvement. Bosnia and Herzegovina's Electoral Commission has decided to recount votes for the president of the Serb entity. The Balkan country held general elections on October the 2nd, including for president in Republika Srpska. The main contenders were longtime leader Milorad Dodik and opposition candidate Jelena Trivić. Dodik was leading with 30,000 votes, according to the first results, as opposition parties declared Trivić the winner, saying the ballot was rigged and needed to be recounted. Thousands of people in Bosnia's Serb entity have protested against the results, and Dodik, who has denied the fraud allegations. Let's take a closer look at what happened.
U ovom trenutku proglašavam da je gospođa Željka Cvijanović definitivno pobijedila na mjestu člana predsjedništva i da ona ide u predsjedništvo, a ja da sam pobjedio na mjestu za predsjednika Republike. Hvala lijepo.
Obraćam se javnosti, narodu Republike Srpske, da, ovo je bila pobjeda naroda.
Veli ovaj, mi smo pobjedili, veli onaj, mi smo pobjedili, a nema od toga ništa. Po mome još na nuli, dok god ne skupe sve glasove i glavni ne kaže toliko je glasalo, toliko za toga i tako.
Nisam pokradena ja. Pokraden je narod Republike Srpske.
Joining us now is Yasmin Hasanovic. He's a lecturer at the Faculty of Political Sciences at the University of Sarajevo. Yasmin, seems like tensions are running high in Republika Srpska, the entity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as we wait for yet another result after the votes have been recounted.
Yes, unfortunately, it seems so, but also it's nothing new because the tensions that are coming from Republika Srpska are not only after the election process, but it is in just different ways, almost like a normal state.
And what do you make of Election Commission's decision to recount the vote? Do you expect this can diffuse tensions?
Well, it depends how we define tensions and what we consider as them. Yeah, as we speak currently, due several accusations of irregularities and electoral fraud, the Central Election Committee decided to recount the elections and the ballots on some places. But however, it just seems how, on the one side, how the current government in Republika Srpska is probably losing their support on one side. But on the other side, we also need to focus who are those that are protesting, because if we see more precisely, we cannot unfortunately see any political nor ideological difference between the position or opposition. So it looks only like that the position wants to maintain on the position and on the governance because they are running something.
And what kind of arguments and proofs does the opposition have that the vote was rigged? What are they saying?
Well, they are saying and accusing the leading political structures in Republika Srpska that they were canceling some of the ballots, that they were even burning some of the ballots that were for the candidate Trević. So there are different kind of accusations.
And Dodik says that this decision is not right, and regardless of what the result is, he will not respect it. What happens then?
Well, that kind of rhetoric is unfortunately nothing new from Milorad Dodik. One of the reasons is that he is not respecting anything that comes from the central level or the state level. On the other side, we could see his way of dealing with the opposition and the opposition parties. But to be honest, I don't see any further political change if the opposition wins in Republika Srpska, because there is no ideological difference between the opposition and the position. The only difference is that Milorad Dodik tries to save his clientelistic political apparat he has in Republika Srpska, while on the other hand, the opposition believes that Milorad Dodik is not leading Republika Srpska well. And if we could hear the narrative from the opposition, it's basically the same narrative, the same political narrative we can hear from Milorad Dodik. They don't respect the country. They have also that kind of understanding that Republika Srpska is a state or needs to be a state. So whatever happens, I think that Milorad Dodik, or at least the politics of Milorad Dodik, won.
So Yasmin, there were around, in the first count, there were around 30,000 votes more for Milorad Dodik. So very close. And you are saying both of the candidates have very similar secessionist ideas and don't respect the state of Bosnia. So
I wouldn't say.
Why would?
Yeah, sorry.
Just a moment. So what is the main thing that divides people in Republika Srpska then?
So the first, I don't think that the opposition has a strong separatistic statements as Milorad Dodik or SNSD or the leading coalition around SNSD, but their claims for a more, let's say, independent Republika Srpska can be traced. So what is the main difference? As the difference is not ideological, the people are not satisfied with the politics of Milorad Dodik, and that is a politics where you need to be loyal to the party, where it's a politics. It is basically something I would call even a deep state or a captured state. Of course, I'm not thinking here that Republika Srpska is a state, but in regard of political theory, SNSD is capturing the institutions of Republika Srpska, and it is running his clientelistic machinery, favoring only those loyal people to Milorad Dodik and to its party. So basically, it's just the idea to get on the power, but not or to fix something that that they expect from Milorad Dodik, but they don't get from him.
And what if the authorities come to the conclusion that the opposition is right, that the vote was rigged? What happens then? Can we expect some kind of court proceedings when it comes to Milorad Dodik and his associates?
That's a good question that I think nobody can answer well. If we could see what happened previous in the previous time, we couldn't see any kind of trials nor anything towards Milorad Dodik, only putting him on some international blacklists, but that's all. So I cannot predict what can happen, but
just briefly, I don't have much time, Yasmin, left. In case, hypothetically, Jelena Trivić wins, what would this mean internationally for Bosnia and Herzegovina? Would we then have a little bit more peaceful time, let's just say, when it comes to Bosnia and its relationship with neighbors?
Probably. It depends. When you say with neighbors, it depends how Jelena Trivić and the opposition will be accepted in the neighboring Serbia, for instance. And we could see that Aleksandar Vučić is very careful with giving support or congratulating any part in Republika Srpska. Also, there are some triggers that could be understood that the politics in Serbia is changing towards those who are being favored in Republika Srpska. But also one important thing is that Milorad Dodik is the closest ally to Vladimir Putin. And we could see, I think, that he is the only politician from Europe that can, if we don't consider Turkey nor Belarus, that can freely go to Vladimir Putin. So it could also probably weak a little bit the Russian influence, but of course I cannot be sure what will come next.
Okay.
But that's first insight.
Okay, thank you, Yasmin, for your insights. Thanks for watching Across the Balkans. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.